Hi, my name is Will, and today I'd like to show you how to use Supabase with Unity. So the first thing I'd like to do just to get started is show you this app running. It's a little demo app that I built. And what it is it's a way to illustrate how I'm using with Supabase with Apple Sign-On in a way that's really just simple. It's just a kind of basic UI, but the idea is to, as we go through this, you're going to see how I built the integration with Supabase and how you can use it in your own projects. So just to start out for the demo, what I've done is I've created a project with Supabase. So inside of that project, I have defined a remote procedure call, which I'll go ahead and show you really quick. So this is my project running up on Supabase. Supabase is a Postgres database system with a bunch of other services and wrappers. So of course, the most interesting for this is going to also be the authentication system. So as we go through and look at the Supabase dashboard, we can see that in the authentication side, I've got a couple of users, a user that I've set up with the email provider and also the Apple provider. So if we go in and we look at the configuration here, we can see that we've got Apple sign-on turned on. We've got services and bundles and secret keys and all this fun stuff. But once we've got all this stuff set up, we can then go ahead and build an integration that'll allow us to log into our database backend that we're building with Supabase via Unity and native sign-in with Apple. So first off, we've got some function that we've written. So if we go here and we look at functions, we can see that I have created a hello world function. We can look at that real quick and edit. And what we can see is this one actually just says hello world, and the one that we actually are using is hello world as JSON. So what this is this is a database function that I've written in JavaScript, and it's actually living in the database, but it automatically gets wrapped up as a public remote procedure call that I can call. So it's just a REST service, basically. Now, in this case, I'm just taking in a hello and then returning back the parameter name, which comes in, and then returning back hello name. Cool. So we can go back to our Unity build that's running right now, and I can click call Supabase RPC, and we wait for a second, and we get the output. Now, a couple of really subtle things to notice are, one, the request that I'm making to Supabase is actually happening async. So I have this little cube spinning in the background just to kind of illustrate that the Unity player's main loop is still running while we're making all these calls to these remote services, which is really nice. So we verified that I've got a Supabase project up and running, and now I'm able to call a remote call on that package. So the next thing I might want to do is add in login. So I'm just going to assume that you have some familiarity with the concept behind sign-in with Apple with the native dialog box, but basically at the most basic level it is you want the user, when they get to a login page, to be able to click a button and have this dialog come up, right? It's the native dialog for the platform. Now in this case, I'm running this app on my M1 Max Mac, but I'm running it as if it was an iPad on Mac OS app. And this means that I'm able to build and launch it really fast and still get access to native services like this. Normally, when you build a project with Unity, Unity really recommends running if the project is set targeting a device, like an iOS device, to go ahead and target an actual device. So I could have my phone tethered and then be building and downloading the app to that to run it. But in this case, I want to just run it on my Mac, and I'm able to do that. And we'll show how that works in a few. But right now, I can just go ahead and hit return to log in, put in my password, and then log into the system. Nope. And here we can see that I've gotten the login to start, and then I've also gotten the identity token back from Apple. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Supabase sign in with Apple Native. So this is going to take all the credential information that I got back from Apple and go ahead and log into Supabase. And sure enough, I'm able to get back the identity token from this native sign in. And if I go back over here into my auth table, I can actually see that I've signed in with Apple, and I have my user identifier over here that just came back. So I'm able to complete the flow for the login. Okay, now the other one, of course, that I could do is I could also do just to sign in with email and password. So in this case, I might say I'm going to create a new one, and put in a new password as well. Let's put in the password. So first I can click sign up, and it signed up, and as soon as it did that, it gave me a session token back. But I can also verify that I can sign in again later by clicking that, and there I'm just getting a little more info back. And if I go back to my dashboard and I refresh the users table, I can now see that I've got I've got a email address and account that I've signed up here as well. Okay, so we've now shown in the demo so okay, now let's go ahead and test out signing in to Supabase with an email and a password. So here I'm going to go ahead and create a new account. And I can click sign up. I can get the ID back to show that the sign in worked, and I can even click in sign in. And here I'm just getting a little more info back, but it's the same thing. It's showing it's an authenticated user. And if I come over here to my dashboard, and let's come over here to my dashboard and go ahead and hit refresh. And sure enough, we can see in the Supabase dashboard that this newly registered account that I just created exists as an email account. So part of the point here is that it should be simple. It should be really easy to get this stuff working. It is, unfortunately, can be a little complicated to get all this stuff set up and working. Now that we've sort of seen that we're able to log in, we're able to make calls, we're able to sign up and create new accounts with Apple Native or email and password, let's go ahead and take a few minutes to kind of review all the steps that it takes to get this working. Okay, so let's look at my Unity project. So if we look at the project here, this is a pretty standard, just little basic Unity UI that I've created. If we look at the code that I've created in an app directory. I just have a couple of basic classes, which we'll take a little bit of a closer look at. And I've got a few other packages that I've set up. So I've got Apple sign in with Unity. So that package is right here. Actually, let's see. That package is this package right here. It's up on GitHub, and it's just a plugin to support the native code integration that's required to get Unity working with Apple. And it's complicated to get set up in many ways just because of all the back and forth that you have to do back with the Apple developer portal. But the main thing for our purposes is you just install it with the Git URL, and then you do need to go ahead and follow the instructions here to get all of the entitlements set up in Xcode. So what happens is when you're working with Xcode, you use Xcode to add in the functionality saying to Apple, yes, I want to be able to implement sign in with Apple, and my app is going to support that. I'm not going to take the time to go through and replicate all of the steps that are involved here. It's just a lot to do, and that would take, easily and probably an hour or two to a video just to get through all the steps. And unfortunately, it can be a little hard to debug it while you're going through it because it is a live production system for Apple for supporting all these security services. So you have to be very careful and look at logs in detail if something's not working properly. I would recommend, before you even go through this process, go through the Supabase documentation on getting login with Apple set up and working just with Supabase. And what this will do is it'll walk you through, you have to set up an app ID with Apple, you have to get a services ID, which is the web service side of things. Then you need to generate a secret key. And this is a little wacky when you go down through here. You have to set up a callback, you create the service ID, then you get a secret key file from Apple. And you do have to go through and generate from the key that you get from Apple, which is a P8 file. You then use a little Ruby script to then convert that to a JWT file, which you then put up into the Supabase configuration. So the results of this will go up into Supabase. And unfortunately, even just one or two keystrokes can be enough to make it not work. So the first time I did this, I accidentally copied and pasted an extra space character into the JWT file that I uploaded to Supabase. So anyway, again, going through all these steps and processes would take quite a long time, and I just want to kind of show you the core meat of this video of things that maybe aren't documented as well right now. Okay. So let's just take our Unity project, and we've got our sign in with Unity package that we've added through a get URL through the Unity package manager. Then in addition to that, we've got all of the integration functions with Supabase. And the most significant thing here is the Supabase C# package. So once I've installed NuGet for Unity, which is a package to install NuGet packages into Unity. So NuGet, if you're not familiar with it, is a package manager for C#. Kind of like if you're on Java, there's Maven or NPM on JavaScript. NuGet allows you to use NuGet, which is, like I said, the C# package with Unity. So if we go back, we run through the install for this. I would recommend, you can just use the package manager to install it, the regular Unity package manager to install the NuGet package manager. But once you do that, then you will have a menu here, Manage NuGet Packages. And what you're going to want to do is go ahead and install the Supabase C# package. And here you can see that package listed, and it's got a number of sub packages that it will bring in with it. And you can see these over here in the Unity project. I've got my mapping and the Newtonsoft JSON serialization, deserialization stuff, and the WebSocket client. All this stuff to make Supabase work just gets pulled in for you. Now, what you're going to want to make sure is that the GoTrue C# version that you have is at least version 3.1.1. And the reason for that is that's the first version that adds in support for getting the key back from sign in with Apple and then passing it back as a request to Supabase to do the login. Okay. So make sure you get that version. Now, the one last other thing that you'll need to do is I would recommend installing the package Unitask. Unitask is a async await library for Unity. And what this does is it makes the standard C# async and await functionality that you get, it makes sure that that integrates properly with all of the Unity player loop functionality. So it's just a really great package for working with async await in Unity. And if you use that with Supabase, it'll make things work much more easily. Okay. So I know we've covered a lot of different little pieces here. We've installed, presumably, we've created and set up a Supabase project. We've verified that the Supabase project is working with sign in with Apple. We've installed a bunch of packages. I know this is a fair amount of stuff to cover. And again, I'm not going to provide step-by-step details on everything because all this stuff is documented. The more important thing I think for this is just to show you that it works and kind of from a high level how all these pieces fit together. Okay. So once we've got all these things installed, what we then need to do is just add some code to our project to make these pieces work. And so I have created two little scripts here, one Supabase, one which I just called Supabase stuff, and one which is Apple sign in. And on the Supabase stuff, I have an output, which is basically just the text field that I'm dumping errors into. I've got an email input and a password input. And then I have for the sign in with Apple, I'm also just dumping any errors or messages out to this text field. So my scripts are pretty simple. You'll notice that I've got these labeled old and new. Old is just a reference to the fact that what I'm showing you here really is like quick and dirty versions of these scripts. And most importantly, there's not a lot of error handling. And so one thing that you'll find when you start implementing identity and login systems is that the happy path flow is really kind of simple. It's not very much of the work. It's like put in an email and a password, click the sign in but with Apple button, easy peasy. You'll have all these error handling situations like, do you want someone to confirm in the UI that their password matches? How do you want to deal with the account already existing, but they sign up again? How do you want to deal with they forgot their password? All that fun stuff. And a lot of that stuff, Supabase has support for making that easier for things like, click a button and fire off an email to them, letting them know how to reset their password through a web UI. But for the purposes of this, I just want to keep it really simple to, there's just two email password field and you click a button to sign in. So the new version that you see is here is me starting to build out a version of this with all the proper error handling and stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at my scripts real quick. So this is the Supabase login, and when we scroll through here, you can see I've just hard coded in my Supabase URL and my Supabase public key. These are two standard things that almost anybody who's working with Supabase will be familiar with. And basically it's showing you where your project is. And that's also a public key. Now, the important thing about this is that the public key is meant to go onto a client and be operated in essentially an unsecured way. So for example, if you're working with Supabase on a JavaScript project, you just put this key into the public JavaScript file. And if someone wanted to get in there and pull out that key, they probably could. And the same thing's true on a Unity project where you're building a project, maybe you're distributing an iOS app or a Mac app or whatever, and it's okay to bundle in the Supabase public key into your final built project. So then I've just got my input fields here. I have a static that's holding on to my Supabase client, and then I have something called an ID and a nonce. And these are really just little bucket holders for when I'm working with the native sign-in with Apple. And we'll talk about that when we get down to those methods. So what I do is I have an async function that kicks off on the start to initialize the Supabase client. And this is an example of where by using Unitask, I'm able to get the async support working in Unity nicely. And all I'm really doing is setting up the client, passing in the URL and the public key. Then the first one we have here is register a user. Now, hilariously enough, that is the method that I need to kick off to actually tell Supabase I want to sign up a user with this email and password. Then I do a try to kick off the actual code in an async fashion. And then I have a lot of exception handlers. Now, the Supabase C# client out of the box has all of these different exceptions that might be thrown. And unfortunately, they don't have a base exception. And sometimes it's very important to get this content back because you want to be able to know why something went sideways. So again, this is an example of, I wouldn't recommend doing the error handling like this. For a normal user, you wouldn't just dump error into a text field. But for my purposes and for debugging, this is fine, if a little gross, but whatever. And then basically I grab the result, and then I'm just sticking the user's session ID into the text field right now, just to show that I'm able to actually get the sign up session back out. So really, out of all this code, the only thing that matters is sign them up with an email and a password, fire it off, and then go ahead and grab the session that comes back. So this is the same thing, except here I'm signing in with a password instead of creating a new account. Same basic thing, fire off one request, a ton of error handling, and then grab the session. And that's really all that's important here. This is the RPC call. So this one here, I have the RPC call set up as publicly open up on the Supabase side. So just fire off a REST request, you're going to get back a hello world. Pretty simple stuff. And again, error handling is kind of the more complicated part there. And this is just a little callback that I was using as a test case and then the RPC call. And then here is the sign in with Apple. Now on this one for debugging, I just go ahead and append some text in just to show what's going on. And then this is the method that actually calls the Apple sign in. So you'll note that it's got an ID token here, this identifier token. And let's go ahead. This is actually the Supabase side. So this one is actually getting called by the Apple sign in. So let's go ahead and look at the Apple sign in code real quick. So on this side, we're just using the Apple sign-in code that I showed you earlier to go ahead and initialize the Apple Auth Manager, which is this is the C# wrapper for the native code that calls it. And when it starts, it goes ahead and launches and says, hey, if this is a supported platform, go ahead and fire up the Apple Auth Manager. Then it goes ahead and tries to grab the Supabase component as well to send it messages. Now you do need to add in the auth manager as an update loop in order to process. You can go ahead and read the sign in with Apple for Unity documentation on what's going on for that. And here, what I do is now is I go ahead and say, let's perform the sign in. So the simple version, I'm not using a nonce or a nonce verify. We'll talk about that in just a minute. In this case, all I want to do is just go ahead and set up the credentials to log in. I want to go ahead and get the email back in their full name once they log in. And that is the one-line call that actually brings up that native dialog box. That's pretty much all there is to it. And then I'm hoping that I get a success callback and I might get an error callback. So let's go ahead and look at the success callback for this. And on this one, I'm getting back the credentials from the sign in with Apple box. And here you can see a bunch of the details that I'm going to get back from sign in with Apple. I've got a user ID, an email only on the first login, and I'm going ahead and just stuffing these in player preferences. Again, this is just temporary stuff where I'm trying to debug what's going on. The most important thing here is that I have this callback to the Supabase assign identity. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling this little Supabase chunk of code, go ahead and take this identity string that I got back from Apple, which is a JWT, and stick this in the Supabase lump of code for now. Now, I've been talking about nonces and nonce hashes a few times. Let's go back and do the same thing, sign in with nonce. So on this one, I just go ahead and log into the Apple, bring up the Apple Identity Manager, and just say, give me their email back and their payment. Done. On this version, using something called nonces. And a nonce is, the idea is it's a one-time secure cryptographic way of saying, hey, I just want this to be a request that happens once and only once, and don't allow it to be replayed. And so it creates a more secure path where I'm saying, I send a nonce in, which is just a string of basically whatever I want to send, like gibberish text, ideally some cryptographically secure random string. Go ahead and send that into Apple. And then I want to go ahead and make sure that I get a appropriate response back that matches. And specifically what I do is I generate, or I use the helper in the Supabase Go tree to generate a cryptographically interesting string. Then I hash it using this method. Then I pass the hash to Apple. So then the hash goes to Apple. Apple processes it as part of the sign with Apple. And when I get that JWT back from Apple, it includes this hash mirrored back to me and tied into the JWT. So what's cool about that is then I can take that, this nonce and the nonce verify back and then send those along with the Supabase, and then Supabase can use that to then verify that the login was correct on their end. That the data that we got from Apple and that we sent to Supabase is what's expected from that native dialog. It's a lot of cryptographic security stuff, and maybe if you're used to working with this kind of stuff or maybe not. But the important thing is, by using the C# integration with the Supabase stuff, it just works. I'm able to go ahead and create these security keys, pass them into the native dialog, fire it off to Supabase, and all that stuff just works, including on the server-side processing side. Okay, so now let's go back to the Supabase side again. And here, now we have this Apple sign-in method. And so this is what's happening when I click on that button in the app that says, go ahead and actually finish the sign-in with Apple with Supabase and send that back. So here, what I've got is I've got the identity token, and I go ahead and take the identity back, go ahead and add a couple of, I do have to manually, for some reason, at this point, I'm adding in the API key headers back to Supabase. And then I say, hey, if I have a nonce, go ahead and send that back and log in to Supabase. So this is really the most interesting thing that's been added just now to support the full flow with Supabase and sign in with Apple, which is I can now say sign in with the identifier token, which is really the JWT that I got back from Apple. Go ahead and kick over that nonce that I sent as well, and I just get a session back from Supabase, and I'm kind of off to the races at that point. So let's go ahead and go back to the demo again, and I'm just going to walk you through again one more time what's happening here. First, I'm going to click the RPC. So this is just me hitting my Supabase project. Let's go ahead and click on Apple sign in with nonce again. And so again, I bring up the native dialog, hit continue, type in my password. But if I was on my phone, I'd probably just be doing Face ID. And then now I'm able to log into Supabase and do all the fun Supabase things I might want to do with databases and tables and working with Postgres and all that fun stuff. Okay, a couple of troubleshooting things. I'm going to go back over and show how this actually gets built. So I'm going to go ahead and inside my Unity project, I'm going to show you a couple more build setting tweaks that I had to make. One of them, of course, is you want to make sure that the bundle here matches the bundle that is set up on your Supabase project and in your Apple stuff. And then you'll know I've got iPhone and iPad device SDK targeted, and I bumped up the minimum OS version to 15. That was just something I was doing when I was doing some of the testing. And the other thing that you will want to do is, in the compilation side of things, is manage stripping level. Set that to minimal. So this was one of the little kind of gotchas I ran into when I was doing the project, working on this stuff, which is if I set it to low, I was getting JSON serialization errors because Unity was dead code stripping out the constructors for some of the objects in the Supabase C# library. So that then broke my project. And that's just one example of all the little things that can go sideways when you're trying to get this stuff set up. So then let's say I go ahead and hit build and run. And here I'm going to go ahead and tell it to build in the same test project, but this time I'm going to go ahead and hit replace. And I want to do that because I want to show you how a couple of other minor little things that might pop up in Xcode to kind of complete the circle in the loop here. So when you do this, if you do an append instead of a replace, it does run quite a bit quicker. And I may go ahead and speed up a section of this. So now we go back into this. I'm going to close and hit build and run again because I had Xcode already open. And this time I'm going to hit append. You will find that you wind up, when you're trying to get this stuff working, that you're going to wind up going through this process of building stuff in Unity, then telling it to rebuild in Xcode pretty frequently. And so part of the thing about this is that when you're actually doing this, what I would suggest is go ahead and get Apple sign-in working and then make sure you're testing it frequently. But when you're working inside of the Unity editor, and you just want to hit play inside of Unity, you can just use sign in with the regular email and password to get an identity up and running. So that's a way to kind of make sure that the sign in with Apple stuff's working, but then for testing, go ahead and do sign in with email. That's usually an easier way than trying to rebuild your project and run it in Xcode every time. All right, one big thing. By default, Unity will build a project that targets any iOS device ARM. But if you try to run it, you're going to get a message that says, hey, I can't run this because there's no iOS device. Now, I could plug in my phone and run it there, but that's kind of clunky. Instead, if I just go up here and I select my Mac designed for iPad, now when I hit run, I will go ahead and get it working on my machine. Now I just got a build failure. This is a classic thing. It says you need a provisioning feature. Go ahead and, assuming everything's working properly with Xcode, you can say flip on automatic manage signing and then select your team. And now you'll get a dev team project. Now, if I go ahead and hit run again, you'll note that the error doesn't clear when you do that. Go ahead and hit run, and it'll build the project. It's usually a couple hundred files. It seems to be about what I wind up with for it to build. So it takes a little while. And again, this is where once I have a successful build, and if I go back into Unity and say, just hit Command B to go ahead and run the project again, if it's set up to do an append, it won't rebuild your whole Xcode project for you, and it will remember that it's already built and compiled a lot of the assets. So it's a much quicker process once you've gone through that. This time I thought it was just good just to see this running once, just so you can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. And honestly, this is a good excuse to get an Apple Silicon machine, so that way you can get this My Mac designed for iPad functionality working. And also, this is a great excuse to go tell your boss or whatever that you need a brand new top-of-the-line Mac to help with your builds. Code, unfortunately, Every framework that I've used for working with building stuff for iOS at this point, you still wind up exporting an Xcode project and then having to build and run it on the device. Now here we've got the project up and running again. And once again, let's go ahead and review the functions, the features. RPC, this is just simply hitting the Supabase project to verify connectivity. Let's go ahead and hit Apple sign in with nonce. So this is the full security flow. Click that, and I'm going to go ahead and log in again. And now you'll see that I got the success. Now you'll note the debug output. I sent a nonce to Apple. And then I sent the hash back, which is what I also then send along with the JWTB from Apple onto Supabase. And then I got an identity token back from Apple, which is what then I send on to Supabase. And it's all up and working. Okay, now I know I covered a lot of material really quick. This may have felt a little bit like a whirlwind, and partly it's just going through all the steps. I do recommend that you get sign in with Apple working once in Supabase before you even start trying to get it working in Unity. And I will quickly show you the dashboard for Supabase on that. So if I go in and I look at my providers and Apple, the big feature here is the iOS bundle ID. So this is the thing that's tying together the Apple project, my Unity project, the Xcode stuff, and that is really one of the hearts of it all. The other thing to note is that the Apple secrets expire every 6 months. So what that means is that when you go to support sign in with Apple, you need to set a reminder that about every 3-4 months, you need to go back and regenerate the JWT token with the Ruby script in the Supabase setup to make sure that your users will still be able to log in. So long story short, sign in with Apple works. You can get it working in Unity. It's really nice for your users. It's really nice for you. It means that you'll be able to get through the App Store review for showing that you support Apple sign-in. You have all the pieces that you need. I hope this video was useful for you and interesting. I know, like I said, I covered a lot of material really quickly. I was kind of blitzing through it. The main takeaway is that you can absolutely use Supabase sign-in today with Unity, and it works really well. Very happy with it. If you like this kind of content and you'd like me to do another video about it, or maybe dive into one piece to explain something, feel free to comment and let me know. And thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.